Thank you all for joining. I literally was preparing for zero participants because I was like, there's so many good offerings on this first session that, and I think that this topic is super near and dear to my heart, and I think so important, but also requires a lot of courage and like strong mental health. And this is just a time where those things are sometimes lacking. So I really appreciate that you guys came, and I'm excited that it's a small group because I think that this conversation should be just that, a conversation. So yeah, I'm super excited about it. Quickly, these are our All Learners professional agreements. So I'll give you guys just kind of a minute to read them. Does anyone have any questions about the agreements, or like a nod or thumbs up that feels good or okay for you? Awesome. So my name is Erin Oliver, and I work full-time at a small school in Vermont, Grand Isle School. We're K-6. We serve students K through 6, and I work as the math specialist there. So in a good year, I split my time between co-teaching with teachers during regular math classrooms, and working with smaller groups of students for math intervention. This year, it's kind of more math intervention than classroom instruction, which has felt like a huge loss to me, but it is what it is. And I started my career teaching in New Orleans like about a year and a half after Katrina happened. So a lot of this talk actually comes from experiences and some professional development that I got while I was working in New Orleans. It was this amazing, challenging time period where an entire system of education was attempting to change for the better. And I learned so much from that, but I also saw a lot of the obstacles that I think we face in education, and what it means to really change a system. And I super believe that this idea of having difficult, and I call them mindset conversations with our students, our colleagues, and our families is a part of, actually a really crucial part of changing the system. Okay, we're gonna start with this idea of the Stockdale Paradox. So I originally heard about this idea in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, which is a really interesting book about how do you turn businesses, organizations from being a good organization into a great organization. And that jump from being good to great is actually super challenging. And I think about it a lot because I think a lot of us exist in pretty good schools and not great schools. And a lot of students get pretty good education, but not great education. So James Stockdale was an admiral in the Vietnam War, and he became a prisoner of war during that time. And when Jim Collins writes about it, he writes about reading about his experience, Stockdale's experience, and saying like, oh my God, he faced so many challenges, from the way they were treated, from not knowing how and if they were going to be released, and how do you get through an experience like that. And I regularly kind of referred to this quote in the first few years of teaching, because my experiences were just so challenging that I needed kind of a way to take on the the realities of why it was so challenging, and also have a vision for myself of what I thought was possible. And so when Stockdale's asked, like, how did you make it out of this experience, he says that he really never lost faith in the belief that he was going to get out, and the belief that that this really, really challenging experience was actually going to benefit him in the end, that he was actually going to really have um, good things happen to him because of taking on this challenging experience. So he says, you must never confuse faith that you will prevail, which you can never afford to lose, with the ability to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. Um, and he goes on to say that the people who really weren't able to make it were the optimists, the ones that thought that, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas came around, and they weren't out by Christmas. And so the optimists say, oh, we're going to be out by Easter, and that doesn't happen. And if kind of, that was like a shocking thing to me, because I felt like um, optimism about what we can achieve feels really, really important. But if you only have that optimism, if you only, and I connect this to the big idea of all means all, if we only just focus on this belief that all means all without actually really confronting the realities of what's preventing all students from achieving, then we're not going to get there. And I particularly feel like this paradox of being able to really be honest about the brutal facts of your reality while not losing faith in your vision is particularly relevant to me this year again. So it was super relevant to me in the start of my career when I was facing so many challenges. But this pandemic year has been a new set of challenges that I find myself coming back to this idea a lot. So some of the brutal facts of the current reality, pandemic restrictions inside of our schools are, to me, so challenging. And I'm seeing a lot of math instruction kind of fall into these holes, like the worksheet hole, the sage on the stage hole, just because the restrictions make it easier to operate that way. The struggle of, I spent the first few months of this school year trying to provide math intervention remotely to students, and the challenge of what it means to teach to a student while you're connected through a computer kind of blew me away. The achievement gap is growing this year. I see it every day in students with less access, and I love Bob's push to not call it achievement gap, but to call it an instructional and opportunity gap. And that resonates so hard with me, because I'm seeing when, in some of the ways that we've set up schooling this year, that the lack of opportunity is really increasing that gap a ton. And then I have a personal belief that we all operate on our own mental health spectrums, and wherever your own mental health spectrum falls, I kind of believe everyone, students, staff, families, yourself, are on the lower end of that mental health spectrum. So to me, that's like a summary of some of the brutal facts of our current reality. And then I have this vision that I refuse to let go of, this vision that really all means all can be achievable. And I think if it happens in math instruction, it will be a domino effect in other aspects of our school, other aspects of our educational system. Because the more I think about math instruction, the more I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of where we're a lot of the ideas around exclusion of students. So Bob mentioned race and gender, and I would say poverty falls into this, and the exclusion of students. You can see all of that inside of math instruction. It's one of the subjects that we're still okay with at the point of high school. We're still okay with tracking students. We're okay with saying you're ready for algebra and you're not, regardless if that student's potential is really how we've labeled it or not. So I really believe that if we can make all means all happen in our math classrooms, that it will happen across our schools. I have this vision that we can teach math and many of our other subjects in a true inclusion model, that that students can be inside of the classroom and their needs can be met. And I think partly because I started my education career in the South, I just know that we're far from inclusion being the way in which we operate. And it's better in Vermont, it's better in Maine, it's better in New England in general, but we're not there yet. There is a lot of ways in which we're excluding students. So we're not at in exclusion all the way where we keep some students from learning completely, but that is where our education system started, right? Like we really did start an education system where we said whole groups of students were just told you're not allowed to go to school, right? And then we moved to segregation, and again, because I started my career in the South, segregation is still a very deep part of our education system. And if you look for it and if you're really aware of it, it's still inside of our school buildings, even in a better state like Vermont. And then integration is better, but it's still sending very clear messages to students that some are capable and some are not capable. And I hold this vision that we can have math instruction that is as truly inclusive. And I believe having these difficult mindset conversations regularly across the school year, across all of the stakeholders, is one of the ways that we'll get to that spot. So that's kind of my summary of how I think about brutal facts of current reality, and what my own vision and what drives me to be a part of All Learners, what drives me to constantly get better, what drives me to constantly reach out to other colleagues and say, hey, let's do this together. I really want all to mean all. So I want to kind of give each of you an opportunity to think about what are your own brutal facts of the reality of this school year, and what is your own vision for a successful outcome. All right, welcome back, guys. I believe conversation is a really, really important part of the All Learners Network. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a chance to talk. And it's super hard in this bigger setting. So I came to this idea of mindset conversation. And if you're, I included a link. It's just like a quick little like rundown of someone online saying like, what is mindset really? And she accesses a bunch of different definitions and a bunch of different researchers. So feel free to click on that link and check it out. A quick story about kind of where this idea of mindset conversations came from. So originally, a principal that I just super respected in New Orleans came to our school and gave a professional development on the idea of difficult conversations. And it comes out of this book, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, written by Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen. And there's a picture of this book at the end of this presentation if you're interested in reading it. It's super interesting. And it's this idea that in general, in they're talking about businesses, but across all organizations, it's hard for us to have conversations with difficult content. And sometimes what shouldn't be difficult content is still difficult content for a lot of different reasons that we'll kind of dive into. And the principal that gave this session, he gave us these little cards for how do you kind of enter into these conversations. And I just loved it, and actually really put some effort into having these conversations with people. And it kind of blew my mind what I learned from them. And I started calling them not difficult conversations, but learning conversations. Because when you approach it from this perspective, you actually walk away from the person that you had the conversation with so much more understanding about that person. And both of you, if you've done them well, walk away with a better way of working together, a better way of operating together. And it just felt, it felt amazing. So I went from difficult conversations to thinking about them as learning conversations. And then I participated in this coaching program that's not popular here at all called real-time teacher coaching. And in real-time teacher coaching, you are mostly you're coaching first-year teachers in I believe I'm not sure that this is true, but I think this company mostly operates in urban districts, and it's helping first year teachers become better classroom managers. And part of the way you do it is you wear a walkie-talkie, and the teacher wears a walkie-talkie with an earphone, and while they're teaching, you are literally talking into their ear about teacher moves that they should be making that will make for better management. And it's a fascinating experience that takes a lot of courage on the teacher, and takes a lot of practice on the person doing it. But one of the things that blew my mind about the process was part of the conversation that you had with teachers at the end. And the coach that I had when I was being trained in this program, he was, I think, the best at bringing to light what he called mindset conversations. And so in the debrief conversation, part of the formula for this program is you ask a question that helps that helps the first year teacher become aware of a mindset that they hold that is actually driving their actions and driving their behavior management in the classroom, and having a negative impact on students. And as I started to practice, so I had already spent years under this idea of difficult conversations, which I had reframed for myself as learning conversations. I was already having these with students and colleagues all the time. And then I added in this level of this idea of a mindset conversation, of asking a question of the colleague in front of me that would help them to become more aware of a mindset that they were bringing to the classroom and their classroom practices, and that was having a negative impact either on them or on their students or on the relationships that they have with other colleagues. And this really blew my mind. And so I started to really think about all three of them together, that the responsibility that we have to have difficult conversations, to reframe them so that they are learning conversations, and to add in this level of helping people and yourself become more aware of the mindsets that we're bringing to this work. So that's like a little background into why I call them difficult mindset conversations. So a few examples. This first example is from my days of real-time teacher coaching. So mindset conversations are challenging because a lot of times we have kind of invisible mindsets that we haven't explored yet. So I was coaching Mrs. S, and it was her science class, and she's having a ton of behavior management problems, and particularly this student T is disrupting her class a lot, on a regular basis, and on a regular basis he's being kicked out of her class. And so I'm watching the class come in. I'm watching her set up the class. She's passing out work to everyone, and for some reason she doesn't have enough copies of the work. And student T is the student that doesn't get a copy of the classwork, and she just tells him to share with the student next to her. And literally less than 5 minutes later, he has a super disruptive moment that spirals out of control to the point where he is asked to leave the class. And in the debrief, I'm asking her how it's going, and she's just saying, well, obviously it didn't go very well. You saw what happened. You saw how crazy he can be. You saw what level of disruption this student can bring to the classroom. And the mindset question that I had prepared ahead of time so that we could enter this mindset conversation together was, what messages does it send to T when he's the only student in the class to not get a copy of the classwork? And because she had never really considered her own impact on this student and his behavior, she actually started to cry when she thought about what the possible answers to that question could be, and what messages she was really sending T. And it opened up many mindset conversations have led to tears for me, because it's hard to confront something that you haven't been able to see before. But it led to an opening in a conversation where we got to discuss low and high expectations for students. And she was completely okay with him being the student that didn't get the classwork, because she had already adopted such a low expectation for him in her classroom. And there were real reasons for why those low expectations were there, but it gave us an opportunity to start to explore some of the mindsets that were driving his behaviors. And those mindsets were coming from her. And it was an incredible conversation that started to repair the relationship between that teacher and that student. And I don't think if we had never had that conversation, the relationship between that student and that teacher would have continued to disintegrate. So it kind of highlighted to me just like how powerful and how important these kind of conversations are. This next one, Mrs. P and intervention, comes from this year. I was sitting down with a teacher, and we were talking about, I have this time slot available to support some just right instruction for students in your classroom. And let's talk about the ways we can make that work. And we already had a ton of options for how it could work. And at one point in the conversation, she just says, well, like, I don't want to waste my instructional time to pause for intervention. Like, she was doing a word work routine that she felt like was like going really well. And I walked away from that conversation frustrated and angry. Like, at that moment, I couldn't address it because I was so, I honestly, I couldn't really name why I was angry at first. And difficult conversations that turn into learning conversations or our mindset conversations, often you can't have them in the moment. You have to reflect on your own and get to a place where you can say, okay, what's causing the anger for myself? What's causing why is this difficult for me? how can I come at it from a place of curiosity? And so a week later, I came back to this teacher and I said, hey, I need to talk to you about the conversation that we had about starting intervention in your classroom. And you said you felt like it would be a waste of your instructional time. And I'm wondering, why do you feel like it's a loss of instructional time to pause and focus on what individual students need? Where is that coming from? And I shared with her kind of how that idea of it feeling like a loss of instructional time, how it made me feel, and the worries that I had around that. And we had a really interesting, deep conversation about her own struggles this year with pandemic restrictions, and her fears of what she's bringing home to her family. And she has a sick family member at home. And I left with a better understanding of where she was coming from. We didn't come to a solution that feels good yet to either of us, but it was a starting point. And that is often another thing that happens when you have the courage to have these conversations, when you have the courage to listen and learn from about where students and staff are coming from. We're not there yet. We don't have a solution that works for both of us, but we walked away with a better understanding of each other's frustrations, each other's fears and worries, and we can use that as a building point moving forward. And I'm optimistic that we'll come to a solution that will feel good for both of us, even though we're not there yet. I know for certain, if I hadn't chosen to come back to have this conversation, that we would not be at a place where we were operating with a professionalism that was good for students. And I know that because of having this conversation, we will continue to kind of get there. And the last one is an example of a student. So I call my intervention classroom math lab, and I had gotten pretty angry at her for working on another project while we were having a discussion. And at the end of class, I asked her to come talk to me, and I said, it feels really disrespectful to me, to our classroom, and to our learning team for you to be focused on another school project while we're talking about the work that we each did. And she said, well, I've been good at math since like I was 4 years old. So like, I can't remember how she ended that statement, but I was like, oh, this is a student that has a really big fixed mindset. Like, she believes she has the math gene, and she also believes that other students in her class don't have the math gene. And not that day because it was dismissal, but the next day I had a conversation with her, and I asked her, why does already being strong at math make you feel like you don't have to participate with your teammates? Oops. And I'm starting to make her aware of her fixed mindset. Starting, I think, with middle school students and high school students. Honestly, the older the students, the more time a student or adult has spent in a fixed mindset, the harder it is for that mindset to change. But she's starting to see the value of participating, and I think she's starting to see that she can teach others in the group, and others can teach her. Um, but if but but having that conversation and pushing myself to push her means that I'm creating a better learning environment for that group. And so those are just 3 examples of how I believe having these types of conversations actually change the culture in your building, and make for an environment where all really can mean all. So why are these conversations difficult? The book does a really good job of talking about these things, but when we enter into conversations, we have a tendency for blame. So the person blaming us or us blaming the person. There's an intention assumption that comes in, this idea that you intended harm towards me, and or you intended to be this way, or make me feel this way. And there's a truth assumption that comes into place when we have conversations, that the way I'm seeing it is true, regardless of which is a lack of acknowledgement that there are multiple sides to every story, multiple sides to every situation. With mindsets particularly, there are feelings, emotions, and identity that's wrapped up in this as well. So this idea, the identity piece particularly, especially with students, it's like these conversations touch on these questions of, am I a competent person? Or am I competent in general? Am I a good person? Am I worthy of love and attention? And if we're not aware that these questions about our identity are wrapped up in these conversations, they turn into kind of nasty conversations and not learning conversations. So there's a lot of reasons that these conversations are incredibly difficult. And while I was reflecting on this presentation, I was telling my colleague, I feel like a hypocrite almost, because I've lost some of the courage to have these conversations this year, because people's emotions are at a lower point, because so many of us are struggling. I almost don't want to step into these conversations because I don't want to push people to a place where they feel bad. But as the more I was preparing this, the more I was realizing that the more times I have these conversations, the more I feel like I'm making progress towards that vision that I hold really dear to my heart of all means all. So I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions or reflections. That was a lot of talking.
I was just going to say that I have my kids write in a journal every day in math class to talk about how they're feeling. And at the beginning of the year, they talk about, if you hear the word math, how do you feel? Like, yeah. Also just talk about environments that were positive for them and environments that were not using names, but and so they teach me a lot about themselves as math learners. And so every day they write in their journal and I write in a journal. So it gives me to reflect. And it'll have math questions on it too, but they also can always write what they are feeling that day. So I love that. I think it's impossible to ignore the cultural impact on math, that there is still an overarching belief that that some people are good at math and some people are not good at math, and that some people have potential for math and some people don't. And that's why that winnowing effect happens that Bob was talking about. And unless we're aware of it and bringing it to light constantly, it will have an impact on students. So I love that there's a place in your classroom for that reflection. That's so awesome. They love that. We've done all the Joe Bowler work on math mindset, and I love Joe Bowler, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they're like, ha ha, like almost like they've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
They said, well, we've heard it, but can we see it like taking place,
Yeah.
So that gives them a chance to be part of it.
Danielle, is your journal electronic or is it paper?
It is a paper journal.
Yay.
I give them a composition book at the beginning of the year. and then they just write in it all year.
And then you just look at them periodically.
Kind of cool to look back, and sometimes it'll just be math problems, or the other like the other day I said, how are you feeling about your remote learning? Like, how's that going? And I learned a lot of things from that, you know, so.
So do you look at them pretty regularly? Do you, like just like once a week or something? And
I
then
collect them every 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
And then I give them a math journal grade. So in the beginning of then they know kind of what I expect. I just want it to be organized, that's all. And to share their thoughts. But so then they get a math journal grade, and then they were funny. They're like, well, since you gave us a grade, we're actually trying harder to write in our journal. And I said, well, it's not really a grade, you know, but I want them to have I guess it's just a really good place. They know they come in every day and it's quiet and they just write in their journal.
That's awesome.
That's something to do for the beginning of class, just to kind of focus in. So
Cool. Erin, have you had these difficult conversations with your administrators or higher ups in your district and been successful with making any changes, do you think?
Yeah, yes and no. For me personally, it takes more reflection to think about how I'm feeling and what emotions and identity I'm bringing to a conversation that is really a managing up conversation, going up to an admin. But I have still had them and have accomplished some systems changes by having them. So I truly believe that that these conversations help to illuminate the aspects of our system and the aspects of our own belief systems that are preventing all meaning all. So I hold myself accountable as part of my professional responsibility to have them at all levels, to have them with students, to have them with families, to have them with staff, and to have them with my own managers. We're about to go into kind of a practice, and one of my examples is a difficult conversation that I should have with my superintendent that I'm probably not going to have, because sometimes you have to reflect before you have the conversation. You have to do some preparation, right? You have to think about how can you get to a place of curiosity, and what's the purpose of this conversation, and what do you think is going to come out, like what do you want to come out of it? And so this particular one, I just continue to feel angry about, like I can't get to a place of curiosity. And so I'm for that reason, I'm probably not going to have the conversation. And also because I've gotten to a place where I just kind of understand that he was probably coming from a place of incredible stress and incredible information and access to an understanding that I didn't have, like a level of understanding that I didn't have, that I don't think having this conversation with him would actually lead us to a stronger place. So sometimes I abandon them, like, even though it's still one that like came up to my mind when I was like, okay, what are some examples of some difficult conversations I have hanging out there that I know I need to have? That was one of the ones I thought of. And as I wrote it down as a possible scenario that y'all explore, I was like, actually, I'm pretty confident I'm not going to have this conversation. So sometimes you just realize that it's not going to lead to that productive learning place that you want it to.
That makes sense. And I like what you just said, something about writing it. Like I have to write something down before I can like bring it to somebody to make sure I have it clear. Just because I get confused easily about like when you think about it and reflect on it, I guess that's where it has to.
And I always have a colleague in my building. So in New Orleans, it was easier because everyone had this training. And so I could say, hey, I'm prepping for a difficult conversation. Can I run through my thoughts with you? And people were kind of like all on board because we'd all been to the same training. In my current school, I had to kind of like teach someone else about these ideas. And I use this person as like event / preparation person. So I need to have this conversation, and I'm not at a place yet where I can I vent a little bit, and also can you push me to get to a place of curiosity so that it can be a productive conversation? Because you can't go into any of these conversations angry, and you can't go into any of these conversations from a place of blame or from a place of like, yo, I'm about to put you in your place because this is happening, right? Like, and that's particularly more true with adults and families. Like, I think I operate from I think my starting place is a place of anger when it is another adult, versus students. I don't have to have like as much preparation. I'm more understanding towards a student's difficult, the places that they're coming at from, than I am of other adults. And so I always also build a partner for myself in preparation for these types of conversations.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thanks.
So slide 11 has some really interesting videos, and one article that definitely watch. Like I sometimes get to a place where I really believe people can't change their own mindsets. And if that's a belief that you hold, then you don't see the value of having these conversations. And there's a few people that I work with every year that I get stuck in this belief, like they are never going to change the way they operate. And so, or a student that seems like extra stuck in a fixed mindset, and it feels like they'll never shift from that. These are just some resources on slide 11 that are helpful kind of ways to kind of shift your own belief. Like, you can change the way in which people operate, and bringing awareness to your own mindsets helps you be able to bring awareness to other people's mindsets. So I'm gonna share my screen again. And I'm gonna go quickly through a few more slides so that we can get to the practice. So I touched on some of these already. To get to a learning conversation, you have to, instead of thinking about intention, because typically people are not ill-intentioned towards you, you have to focus on this idea of impact, how what they've done or what they've said has impacted you, or how what they've done or what they've said, if it's a student, has impacted possibly more your learning community or your learning team than how it impacted you. Again, I feel like I feel a negative impact on myself often with adults, and with students, I often feel the negative impact on the learning community that I'm trying to build. Also, we have to remember that that you can't assume someone had ill intention, that we as humans have have a tendency to assume the worst about others, while treating ourselves more charitably. So if someone says something, and you did the same thing to someone else, you're more likely to have a negative thought about the way that person said it, and to have an excuse for yourself about why you said it, right? So we just have that tendency, and you have to kind of remember that. You also have to get away from this idea that there's a truth in the scenario that happened and that it's your truth. So you have to get to this place where you can be not certain about any of the aspects of what's causing this particular mindset or what's causing this particular scenario, but you have to get to a place of curiosity before you can enter into one of these conversations. And you can't focus on blame. Blame is about looking back and judging, and that will never create a sense of learning for either participant in the conversation. Instead, you have to focus on contribution. How did you contribute, and how did they contribute to this place that you're at right now? And that contribution is more focusing on getting to a place of understanding with each other, and able to help look forward to how you'll move forward differently. You also have to say that you're going to make mistakes, that your own intentions are complex, and that you've contributed to the problem. If you can't accept any of these three things, you can't really have the conversation and have it go productively. There's a lot more in the book about these two slides, the ideas in these two slides, but just kind of going through them quickly. So this is like a formula for a difficult conversation. And it's a helpful formula because it helps to kind of drive you towards these things. So the first, what happened here, that is you doing the reflecting. What happened actually, like what's the content of what happened? Then you have to think about what happened in terms of your own feelings and emotions. And you have to think about what happened in terms of your identity, how it impacted your own identity. If you don't think about the what happened before you enter the conversation, it is very, very likely that it will go to blame, assumptions, negative intentions, and you won't get to a place of curiosity. So you have to pause and have the what happened with yourself or with your venting partner. But first you have the what happened. If you can get to a place of curiosity, hence the Curious George, then you can have the conversation. And if you can't, like I'm still at a place of anger with my superintendent, I'm not going to have the conversation. It's not worth having. It's going to cause further rift in the relationship, not a better one. You start this conversation with a headline. And the way you think about it is a news headline, a headline that's not about your story or their story. It's about what happened that neither of you can refute. So it has to start with, hey, let's talk about, and your headline has to be the thing that happened that neither of you can say didn't happen, right? Like every story, each participant has access to different information because we just don't take in all the same information. We all have different experiences. We all have different things that we pay attention to. So we have different versions of the story. That is always true. You have to start with the third, the like headline, news headline. Nobody can refute. This is a part of the story that neither of us can say didn't happen. And so you have to think about what that starting point is. Then you have to be willing to have it can't be all you. You have to be willing to have a back and forth. Here's the things that I saw from my perspective. How did you see it? Here's what I think. Here's how I think I contributed. Am I missing something? It has to feel like this ping pong or tennis ball match that's and not even competitive, but that there are turns for each person to contribute their sides of things and how they're thinking about things. This allows for the identity pieces to come in, and you have to be a willing listener. So you have to not listen to respond, but listen to truly understand, which means you're often paraphrasing. What I heard you say was, to see if you're listening and understanding what they're saying, or you're acknowledging, wow, there's a feeling of fear here that I didn't understand was present. That's true of the conversation I had with Mrs. P, right? Like I didn't understand the fear that was in this, that's wrapped up in what's making you operate the way you're operating. And now that I've heard it and understand it, it changes how we can go forward. And then you have to get to a place where you can move forward with some solutions, which means at any point where there is blame, labeling of intention, or like any anger, you have to reframe. It's not about blame, it's about contribution, right? It's not about intention, it's about impact. You didn't intend this. I truly believe you probably didn't intend to have this effect on me, but here's the impact that it actually did have. And when you hear an impact that you have to acknowledge it. When these things happen, you get to a place of solution. Questions about this formula? pick one of these scenarios that I propose. They're kind of hanging, difficult conversations that I still need to have, or propose your own and try to kind of walk through this formula just to kind of get it, start to get it in your head. So we're at 11:30, 11:32. I'm happy to stay for questions. I appreciate you guys coming. I hope it felt valuable to you. Feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions. Check out the book. It's really awesome. And I hope the rest of your day is valuable and helpful as well.